She wasn't born in silk. She was born in straw, daughter of a bear trainer, raised behind circus tents, fed on leftovers. By 10, she was dancing for coins. By 12, she was removing the veil. Men didn't ask who she was, just how much. But she smiled, because she knew one thing. Every hand that touched her owed her. She wasn't pretty. She was unforgettable. And in a city built on thrones, gods, and lies, she climbed with the only thing Rome couldn't ignore: her body. And once she reached the top, she didn't clean herself. She remade the empire. Her name was Theodora, the Empress of Byzantium, and she didn't marry into power. She slept her way up, then took the stairs away. This isn't a fable, it's imperial fact. Let's begin. They called her the daughter of dirt. Her father trained animals for the circus. Her mother begged the crowd for coins. Theodora didn't cry when the bear died. She cried when the food ran out. There were no lullabies, only orders, no cradle, only hay. She learned to smile on cue, to bow before she was told, to dance before her legs stopped growing. At 5, she juggled fruit. At 7, she danced. At 9, she was asked to strip. And when she hesitated, her mother whispered, "Men don't pay to imagine." So she stopped imagining. She memorized faces, voices, which men paid, which men touched, which ones never tipped. By 10, she could read a man's desire before he opened his mouth. She didn't know God, or books, or peace. But she knew exactly how to hold a room, and she would never let go. By 13, she was famous, not for her voice, not for her dancing, but for a trick. They called it the Goose Show. She never explained what it meant. The audience just screamed, cried, came back. It wasn't theater. It was humiliation packaged as art, and it sold out. Senators sat in the front row. Bishops watched from behind curtains. Servants placed bets on how far she'd go. She smiled through it all, because each show meant money, each coin meant dinner, each night meant survival. She didn't own her name, but she owned their gaze. And she learned something no book ever taught. If men look at you long enough, they forget your past. And if they pay enough times, they'll rewrite it for you. She left Constantinople with nothing. No name, no protection, no illusions. A governor heading to North Africa took her as a mistress. He promised gold, promised safety, promised to marry her. She believed none of it, but she followed him anyway, because even false promises offered more than familiar pain. In Cyrene, she lived like a shadow, not a wife, not a servant, just a body at his convenience. She washed his robes, bowed to his guests, slept beside him when summoned. He gave her no title, but she listened, to meetings, to threats, to how men faked alliances and buried rivals with compliments. She watched and waited until the day he left her. No goodbye, no coin, just gone. Theodora stood in the doorway with her bags unpacked, her body tired, her face unwashed. And then she smiled, because abandonment felt like freedom. She walked back to the port, not to find love, not to return to dancing, but to collect something she'd never had before: silence. And in that silence, she started building the woman the empire would one day fear. She returned to Constantinople with no money and no man. But something had changed. She walked slower, spoke less, listened more. And when she looked at you, you felt measured. She didn't go back to the theater. She sold thread near the baths, whispered jokes to rich wives, massaged tired shoulders, learned what their husbands feared and what they desired. She became a mirror. Men told her secrets without being asked. Women confessed sins without shame. She offered no advice, just silence. and it made her unforgettable. One day, a priest invited her to a service. She stayed for a year. Not for God, but for stillness. She read, she prayed, she practiced modesty like it was a costume. And when she emerged, the city didn't see a prostitute. They saw a penitent. But they were wrong. She wasn't reformed. She was rehearsed. She had cleaned her story, but kept the blade sharp beneath her robe. Because she knew forgiveness is a better disguise than innocence. And Constantinople was finally looking at her with the wrong kind of trust. He noticed her in a corridor. Not a theater, not a banquet. Just a corridor. Justinian, heir to the empire, nephew of the emperor, saw her standing by a column, selling cloth to a senator's wife. She didn't bow, she didn't flirt. She just looked at him, and that was enough. He asked her name. She gave a fake one. He laughed. She didn't. The next day, she was invited to a private supper. No servants, no audience, no veil. They spoke for hours. He talked policy, reform, philosophy. She talked survival. And for the first time, Justinian met someone who didn't try to impress him. She didn't care who he would become. She cared what he would do. By the third visit, he stopped calling her guest. He called her necessity. By the fifth, he stopped inviting her quietly. And when his court exploded in scandal, when senators whispered whore, when bishops recoiled, he did something no heir had done before. He demanded the law be changed, because the law forbade nobles from marrying actresses, and Justinian was done pretending she was anything less than the future. She wasn't asking for a crown. She was watching how men wore theirs and which ones left it loose. They married in silence. No parade, no chorus. Just papers, rings, and clenched jaws. The Senate fumed. The palace froze. The church gagged. But the law had changed. And Theodora walked through the gates of the palace not as a mistress, but as the wife of an emperor-to-be. She didn't touch the furniture, didn't wear the jewels, didn't redecorate a single room. She sat. She listened. She learned where the corridors met, who blinked when nervous, which doors opened with which keys. Servants feared her. Senators avoided her. Priests prayed harder. But Justinian? He smiled. He finally had someone who didn't flatter him. She warned, she argued, she disagreed, and he called that love. Not romance, not poetry, but partnership. Behind every decree he drafted, she rewrote a sentence. Behind every appointment, she crossed out names. She wasn't decorating the throne, she was assembling it. And every time someone muttered whore behind her back, she took another step closer to ruling the empire they thought she couldn't touch. When Justinian became emperor, she became Augusta. It wasn't just a title, it was a weapon. She entered court flanked by guards, wore purple trimmed in gold, spoke second only to the emperor, and yet she said almost nothing. Because silence from a woman with power is more terrifying than any speech. She read every petition before it reached him, vetoed names from appointments without explanation. She didn't argue. She edited. She didn't plead. She replaced. No one was fired. They simply stopped being summoned. One by one, men who laughed at her history found their careers crumbling. But Theodora didn't seek revenge. She practiced replacement. Every insult was answered not with punishment, but with her presence in a room they thought she'd never enter. She sat beside bishops, spoke over generals, corrected historians, and every time they said, "You can't," she replied by doing it again, only louder. She didn't erase her past. She walked into the throne room with it trailing behind her, like a veil stitched from every name they once called her. They said she ruled the empire from behind a curtain, that she never shouted, never threatened, just whispered. and the empire bent. She had no army, no senate seat, no holy title, but she had Justinian. He didn't move without her nod, didn't sign without her review, didn't trust anyone who didn't fear her, and they all feared her. She restructured the palace staff, banned old courtiers, appointed former slaves to positions of power. She rewrote proximity. It wasn't birth that placed you near the throne. It was loyalty to her. And yet, she still walked like a servant, back straight, eyes level, mouth quiet. Because Theodora didn't need to scream. Her presence was volume enough. She never gave speeches. She rewrote the scrolls that others read, never gave orders, just paused when something displeased her, and let silence do the cutting. In an empire of men and marble, she ruled like smoke, impossible to grip, but choking everyone who breathed her name. Without permission, there was no harem, no room of silks and dancers. There was just Theodora, and that was enough. She didn't share. Justinian never dared take a mistress, not because of love, because of fear. He had seen her smile when insulted, and what happened to the man after. She didn't scream. She appointed. She didn't accuse. She restructured. The court called her jealous. The people called her protective. They were both wrong. She was strategic. Every woman who entered the palace was catalogued. Every glance at Justinian noted. Every rumor tracked to its source and extinguished. She didn't seduce anymore. She eliminated, because she understood. Men in power fall through desire. And she had built her empire by climbing through the bodies of those who thought they owned her. Now she ensured no other woman would do the same. She wasn't guarding her husband. She was protecting the throne from anyone who still thought it belonged to a man. She remembered every insult, every whisper behind a veil, every man who laughed as she danced, then prayed she'd vanish. She remembered the law that forbade her marriage, so she changed it. But she didn't stop there. Theodora pushed through edicts protecting women from forced prostitution, opened shelters, mandated safe return for those trafficked abroad. And when the bishops praised her mercy, she didn't correct them. Because this wasn't mercy. It was vengeance, disguised as reform. She wasn't saving the women. She was warning the men. For every hand that dragged a girl from the mud, she had written a law that dragged the hand into court. She turned her past into policy, her shame into structure, and no one could stop her. Because to challenge her laws was to admit what they'd once done. Theodora wasn't healing the empire. She was stitching her scars into every parchment they'd ever be forced to sign. They thought she would fade, that once crowned, she'd soften, disappear into lace and incense. Instead, she sharpened. Theodora began attending council meetings uninvited, correcting reports, redirecting funds, rewriting protocol. When the generals protested, she reminded them. She slept beside the man who signed their orders, and she wasn't afraid to talk in his sleep. She knew troop movements, supply routes, which provinces would rebel. Because she asked, because Justinian answered. Because she never let him forget who stood beside him when no one else did. She had no army, but she had access, and she wielded it like a dagger. Ambassadors began addressing her first. Foreign queens wrote letters to her, not him. And the people? They still whispered actress behind her back, but never to her face, because she had built something far more terrifying than a reputation. She had built permanence, and in the empire of marble, she made sure her fingerprints were etched deeper than the names of kings. In the great halls of the palace, silence became fear. No one mentioned her name casually. No one laughed too loud. Because Theodora didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. A lifted eyebrow could delay a promotion. A slow nod could start an investigation. She governed through atmosphere. Even Justinian changed. He dressed sharper, sat straighter, thought longer. He knew the throne had two occupants, and one of them had nothing left to prove. One day, a noble woman challenged her in court, accused her of hypocrisy, said the empress could not speak for virtue. Theodora said nothing, but days later, that woman's brother lost his command. Her husband's estate was audited. Her family retired from public life. Theodora never denied involvement. She simply walked past their empty seats with a smile. She ruled not by decree, but by implication. A past no one dared name, a future no one could stop. And while men studied warfare, she perfected a subtler weapon. The ability to make everyone in the room wonder if their next sentence might be their last. She kept her past close, not as shame, but as fuel. Whenever senators called her empress, she remembered how many once called her less. Whenever priests praised her virtue, she remembered how fast they closed their robes when she entered a room. She didn't forgive, she catalogued. And when she saw other women taken from the streets, sold, silenced, spent, she didn't pity them. She gave them jobs, messengers, scribes, watchers. Theodora built a palace within the palace, a network of eyes and mouths that answered only to her. No swords, just secrets, no threats, just access. She knew who stole from the treasury before Justinian did, knew which general took bribes in Thrace, knew which bishop bedded boys on holy days. She didn't expose them, she used them. Because power wasn't in punishment, it was in permission, and when people begged for mercy, she offered it with a smile, because nothing terrifies men more than being spared by the woman they once paid to keep silent. Justinian built churches. Theodora built silence. While he raised domes of marble, she raised walls of fear. They said she was cruel, but cruelty requires care. Theodora didn't care. She let enemies choke on their own words, let cowards step into their own traps. She didn't need spies. She had memory. She remembered which merchant shorted her as a girl. He lost his shipping contracts. She remembered which official mocked her reforms. His name never reappeared on state business. It wasn't revenge. It was architecture. She was building a palace where no one forgot, because everyone feared being remembered. She didn't smile often, but when she did, the room went quiet. And when she didn't speak for a week, ambassadors panicked. Because in the Empire of Byzantium, the deadliest words were the ones she hadn't said yet. And as Justinian's armies marched through dust and blood, his throne sat untouched, because the woman beside it had already conquered something far greater than land: memory. They never called her beautiful again, not because she had aged, but because beauty implies softness. And Theodora had burned the softness away. She dressed like marble, rigid, ornate, untouchable. Even her jewelry looked defensive. Sharp edges, cold metals. She didn't flirt. She didn't entertain. She passed through rooms like a blade passes flesh, without resistance, without apology. Some said she was paranoid, but she had seen what men do to women who wait to be attacked. So she struck first. She pre-approved palace speeches, monitored all correspondence leaving the capital, interrogated anyone with too much leisure. She replaced elegance with efficiency. The empress wasn't an ornament. She was infrastructure. Justinian signed treaties. She scanned faces. He ruled the map. She ruled the room. And slowly, even his enemies began to understand. The empire wasn't run by the man in purple robes. but by the woman who decided who got to kneel at his feet. She never had a child. They whispered it was punishment, a curse for her sins. But Theodora didn't see it that way. She had no heirs because she trusted no one with her name. She had built too much alone to let it pass to someone soft. Instead, she mentored shadows, daughters of slaves, widows of soldiers, girls no one noticed until they stood beside her. She taught them how to enter quietly, how to leave louder, how to hear what wasn't said, how to answer what wasn't asked. They didn't wear crowns, they wore silence, and their power came not from birth, but from proximity. Theodora knew legacy wasn't blood, it was blueprint, and she left hers in the corridors, in the gazes of chambermaids who stared down senators, in the posture of girls who didn't flinch when men raised their voices. She didn't raise children, she raised a species, and every time someone claimed her line had ended, another woman signed a decree and made them eat their words. The plague came quietly, bodies stacked, streets emptied, and still she stayed. Most nobles fled, bishops wept, generals prayed, but Theodora moved deeper into the palace, not to hide but to rule. Justinian caught the fever. For days no voice came from the throne, but the empire didn't collapse, because she stepped in. Decrees were issued, bread was rationed, quarantines enforced. No signature, no fanfare, just action. She dressed in black. Not for mourning, for clarity. Grief was for later. Now was for command. When Justinian woke, gaunt and confused, he asked who kept the empire upright. No one answered, because no one dared say her name. They feared she'd hear it and demand silence again. She didn't need credit. She needed control. And the plague gave it to her, not through blood, but through vacancy. And in that space between panic and power, Theodora proved she didn't need a coronation to rule the world. They began rewriting her before she died, softening her edges, turning orders into suggestions, painting her in pastels she never wore. But Theodora saw it coming. She commissioned her own mosaics, not smiling, not kneeling, not bare, crowned, stern, front-facing. She placed them in churches, above altars, beyond reproach, a sermon in stone. She knew men lie, but marble doesn't flinch. She edited scripture through silence, edited history through placement. When they said she was a saint, she didn't correct them. She let them build the myth, because it was easier than facing the truth, that an ex-performer, without bloodline, without mercy, had shaped an empire through will alone, that she ruled not with love, but with consequence. And when they tried to erase her, they found her eyes staring back, from ceilings they could no longer reach. She didn't ask to be remembered. She just made forgetting her impossible. She died without ceremony. No golden parade, no mourning procession, just a closed room, a locked door, and silence. But silence was always her favorite language. Justinian wept in private. He built more churches, raised more statues, but never remarried. Because how do you replace the person who taught you how to rule? How do you share power after knowing someone who made you better by threatening to leave? The court grew louder after she passed. Advisors bickered, laws loosened, men forgot. But not completely, because every chambermaid who stood taller, every eunuch who spoke slower, every woman who watched before answering, they remembered. They weren't her heirs, but they were her residue, and in that residue, her power lingered. Not in the marble, in the fear. Because long after her body vanished, her influence did not. And in Byzantium, some thrones stayed haunted, not by ghosts, but by precedent. History prefers men. It archives their battles, paints their portraits, names their mistakes as fate. But Theodora didn't wait to be remembered. She carved her name with absence. No dynasty, no heir, just decisions, etched into law, etched into fear. She never claimed holiness. She claimed results. No divine right. Just divine refusal to be less than the men who bought her. She didn't seduce history. She cornered it, forced it to record what it wanted to forget, that an empress could rise from the gutter. That power could smell like sweat and incense. That strategy could wear earrings. And that sometimes, to save a throne, you needed someone who had once danced for coins because they knew how to make a room watch and hold their breath and obey.